Guten Tag. Welcome to tonight's shiur, Muktzah Shabbos, Parshas Voero. So let's go straight to our first question. So last Shabbos, in one shul somewhere in Europe, they have a big Shabbos kettle, an urn, which is plumbed into the mains. And during the week, the way it works is whenever you take out a cup of water, so the balance, then there's a cup of water will come in to the tank, and the thermostat will decide when to reheat the system, etc. So happens that this past Shabbos, after about 10 people have had cups of coffee, someone noticed that the inflow pipe had not been switched off. Well, that means effectively that about 2 liters of water in this large tank, which let's say got 20 liters, were cooked on Shabbos. And therefore, they're asking the question, obviously they asked the question after Shabbos, because yours truly doesn't answer the phone on Shabbos. Question was, are they allowed to have the rest of the water, being that within that water, there's a mixture of water which was cooked on Shabbos. And so there is a well-known halacha, Maaseh Shabbos, if food was cooked on Shabbos or something was created on Shabbos in a violation of Shabbos. So there's a difference if it was done b'mezid or b'shogeg. If it was done b'mezid, it doesn't done knowingly, willfully, there's a violation of Shabbos. Then for the violator, it's also la'olam, forever. And for others, it's mutter after Shabbos. If the violation was b'shogeg, then it's if the violation was b'shogeg, then it's mutter for Muktzah Shabbos. But on Shabbos itself, no one's allowed to have benefit from it. Hence the question, this water in the urn, which was heated on Shabbos, which was boiled on Shabbos, should be a problem of Maaseh Shabbos, and therefore shouldn't be allowed to have that water and mixed in with the rest of the water. The whole hot water tank should be forbidden. So at first I was concerned about this, then I thought about thinking about carefully. There is Mazid, we know, the Mazid is a knowing violation. Shogeg means a violation without knowing the information. Whether typically it says the Gemara, forgot that it's Shabbos today, or forgot that this is not allowed on Shabbos. There's a level less than that, and that is known in Halocho as misasek. That the person is preoccupied in a totally different activity and didn't realize that there is a consequence, that something is halachic is being done. So, for example, if I would lean, if there's a room which is pitch black, and then I leaned against the wall and inadvertently switched on the light, am I allowed to have benefit from that light? We're talking about Shabbos. So this is, I did not switch on the light knowingly. This was misasek, and what we're seeing, there would not be, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, you would not have to bring a korban for such a thing. It's not called a shogeg, it's less than that. So what's the story? Is Maaseh Shabbos of a misasek activity is the consequence osra mutter. So now I can see here in the Piskei Teshuvos in Siman Shin Yud Ches Tesvav. So he gives a couple of examples. Someone added water, thought the water was boiled already, someone poured on water on seeds. He thought that they are not connected. Someone leaned against the wall and didn't realize that there's a switch, opened a door of a fridge, he didn't know that there's light going on, went outside into the street and didn't know that he has something in his pocket. You didn't know that the Eruv is torn. All of these is not that you don't know that it's Shabbos. It's that you didn't realize that you're doing something. You're carrying something in your pocket you didn't realize you're carrying. So there's a discussion in poskim whether that's considered on the same level as shogeg, and therefore if you're not allowed to have benefit, or it's less than shogeg and you are allowed to have benefit from it. So let's say you came home from You walk through the street and you realize afterwards you've got a stick of chewing gum in your pocket. You didn't realize earlier. Are you allowed to now eat the chewing gum in the second location? So according to this, this is the machlokes over here, and he takes the view that since it's a machlokes about a drabonon, the whole thing of Master Shabbos being us is the drabonon, you're allowed to take the benefit of the doubt, and therefore it's the product of a misasik activity is mutter. Consequently, in this case of the hot water, there's cold water which was boiled on Shabbos. By a misasik, that water is permitted on Shabbos, and certainly the mixture of all the rest of the water is permitted on Shabbos. Okay, let's go on to another point. Came up in someone asked this question: what is the story if someone gave in their tefillin to be checked by a sefer, and he finds that there's a word missing, letter missing, which means that it was never kosher? So does that mean the person never put on tefillin all their life? Now, I remember Rabbi Vogel telling that he, as perhaps as a bocher, was involved in a case where the Rebbe gave an answer to check the tefillin, and it was late afternoon. The person had got the answer that the tefillin were apostle, and it was like quite somehow a big surprise. And he tells Rabbi Chadakov in really like a wayfirst that were amazing that the Rebbe saw that this person's tefillin weren't okay and needed to be. And Rabbi Chadakov, instead of excitement, said, "Do you realize it's now half an hour till sunset? Go quickly and get him a pair of tefillin, and he should be able to put on tefillin today." So here we have on the top of the screen, we have here a quote from a sefer called, it's a small sefer on Birchas Hanenin, and at the back it's called Seder. It's from Rabbi Yom Tov Nettel Bronspiegel, so he's got a liquid on the Alter Rebbe's Seder Birchas Hanenin called Likutim Arid. At the back he's got Likutim Nechutzim, and here is quoting the Buchacha Rov. Oid Kosav. Also the Buchacha Rov in Eshel Havroham at the back of the Shulchan Aruch, he writes, if tefillin were possible, or found to be possible, missing a letter. Yesh loima, well, we have something in the Gemara. If a kohen is standing on the Mizbeach and he's just brought a korban, and then someone informs him that he is a cholol, that his mother was a grusha, chalutza, etc., which means that he is posel. That means the korban is posel. And the halacha is that the korban remains until his cholol status becomes known. Everything until then is kosher, and the karbonos are valid. As it says, a pasuk, Borech Hashem Cheloi Ofoyal Yodov Tirtzeh, that even Cheloi, which is understood here as cholol, even that which he did as a cholol, but Borech Ofoyal Yodov Tirtzeh, Hashem accepts this. So the Buchacha Rov wants to say, just like the Kohen's avoid until he's discovered to be a cholol, until that point, anything which he did is kosher, the karbonos are valid. So he wants to do something similar with the tefillin, and until they're found to be posel, they were valid. Consequently, he says there's no need to say Baruch Shem Kved Malchus Leilam Voed on all the hundreds of brachos which the person has said throughout the years on his posel tefillin. That's what he says. Now, on my margin in that my copy of the Likutei Maharit, I'd written, actually, you look up in the Gemara Kedushin there, you see that's only talking about if his disqualification was because of a cholol. But let's say if he turns out, he says the Gemara quite clear, if he turns out that he's a Baal Mum, he didn't realize that this was a Mum, but he had a blemish which invalidates him. So then, even if it's discovered after the fact, after he's brought the korban will be posel. What's interesting is, so in other words, you don't have an amnesty automatically for all newly discovered psulim. It's only the din of chalolus because it's not himself, it's like beyond himself. It's got to do with parents, etc. Now, in Rambam last week, in Hilchos Ritzeach, Perik Zayin, say Halacha Yud Beis, So we have the din that if a person had killed someone, we call it manslaughter in English, he killed someone in error. And then the Torah has instituted the idea of Ore Miklot, cities of refuge, where he is banished to stay in the city of refuge until such time that if the Kohen Gadol, Ad Moisa Kohen HaGadol, until the Kohen Gadol of his time passes away, at that time he's able to go home to his hometown. Now, what happens if the person became banished to the Ore Miklot, to the cities of refuge, and there was no Kohen in office at the time, for whatever reason? So then he has no chance of coming of being relieved, of going home from the Ore Miklot, because there's no Kohen Gadol under whose tenure he he was banished. So then the Rambam says further, Nimtza nigmar dina. If the accused the verdict was passed that he has to be exiled. And then it turns out that the current Kohen Gadol is invalid because his mother was a grusha, etc. So then he's not a Kohen Gadol, or never was a Kohen Gadol. And therefore, Keilu, the status of this manslaughterer is going to be Keilu nigmar dina b'lo Kohen Gadol, as if his verdict had been passed when there's no Kohen Gadol at all. Therefore, he remains exiled in Ore Miklot until the end of his life. So what we're seeing here is that there is no, even in the case of Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza, where the korban would be kosher, but the Kohen himself is not kosher in the past. And similarly, despite the efforts of the Bachot Rov to say that the Tefilin and the Mafreya are kosher, the Pashtus, that's not the case. Although the mistake was only found now, the impression is that the psul is until now also, it's retroactively also. Okay, let's move on to the next point. And that is, I was looking over a book in English, Halocho book, and it came up about eating a peach on Shabbos. And it talks about taking out the stone from the peach. There, the more the focus is on Voero, that it is okay. You can see here, this is from the Shulchan, if I see floimen, you're opening a plum and you throw out the pit. And then if it's not for immediate use, the problem of Voero. If it's for immediate use, then it's okay. But he seems to be saying it's okay to pick up the stone out of the plum, out of the peach. And in my recollection, there's something about someone who was so careful that he would not touch and it's brought halocha. And when he ate dates, he would spit them out with his tongue, not to have to touch them with his fingers. Now, here you can have, this is an Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, Siman Shin Ches Samach Zayin, talking about peels, which are inedible to animals. So then you'd eat the food and you'd spit out the waste with your tongue behind your shoulder. Now, I know it's not the popular minute today. Don't pick them out with your fingers, and don't eject them onto the table in front of you. And then you'll say, oh, there'll be a pile of pits, and it's going to be repulsive, and therefore you'll be allowed to take it away because of the din of Grav Shalrei, that you are allowed to dispose of something which is objectionable, despite it being Muktzah. And the reason is, you're not allowed to create a repulsive presence, and then that would override the din of Muktzah. But meanwhile, without going to the whole discussion, we're seeing here that he wasn't taking the pit with his hand, rather he had to spit them out with his tongue. So how do you reconcile those two? That was what was bothering me. And the answer is fairly simple. And before I go into the answer, now here's a simple question. When you peel a banana, so the peel is not Muktzah, yeah? Even though the peel of a banana is inedible, the proof to that is that even monkeys, when they eat bananas, they take off the peel. But so long as the peel is attached to the banana, it's not Muktzah. Once you've separated it, then it becomes Muktzah. Fine. So now the same thing, the stone in a peach. So long as it's attached to the peach, it's no different to peel. Like you're allowed to peel a fruit, even though the peel is inedible, you should be allowed to remove the pit also. It's not a question of Voero, it's not small things which are mixed in. So it's like peeling. So why should there be a need for Zorik Belshoina of spitting it out with your tongue? And the answer is, Reb Chaim Noah addresses this, and he says the following. We're talking about there, with the dates, it was the style of eating and having the whole fruit in your mouth with the pit, and then you would, once you've kind of separated in your mouth the pit from the flesh of the fruit, then you wouldn't be allowed to take the pit out with your mouth. So let's say, I don't know, if you eat cherries that way, so cherry, you put let's say even you cut the cherry before for it to be boiled, whatever, but if you put the cherry in your mouth, and now you've separated the flesh, and now you've just got a pit in your mouth, the cherry stone, then you wouldn't be allowed to take it out with your fingers. There you'd have to eject it somehow into a container or something, but that would be Muktzah because you've already separated. But before eating, as you wanted to eat the peach or something, that state you would be allowed to separate the stone from the fruit. I see someone's put something on the chat. Thank you. Rabbi Lu adds here about the previous discussion about someone whose tefillin were found to be possible, lemafreya. Yeah, so just to explain, sometimes the tefillin are possible because of the faded letter, cracked letter. That could be that it was once kosher, and then due to time where etc., it became possible. There's a worse than that would be that you find it was never kosher, and that's so the Rebbe's advice to this person was to find another person who's not wearing tefillin regularly and to persuade them and encourage them to wear tefillin daily. That would be a tikkun for the having missed out on tefillin. Thank you, Rabbi Lu. Let's move on to the next question. So here, a young man I've gotten to know from another country, and he got married to a Giyores, and they're living in Israel, and her father, who's a devout Catholic, came for a visit. So the young lady made a special loaf of bread and offered her father to have some of the homemade bread, and he said a whole blessing, holding the bread, some prayer, some Catholic prayer, and now they're asking, forgot to say, are they allowed to have the rest of the bread? So I asked, what is the content of this prayer? So he said something's got to do with the flesh of Yoshka, something like that, something to do with Yoshka. So I wasn't sure. He didn't tell me exactly the prayer, but I wasn't sure about it. And then it occurred to me that really this bread does not belong to the father or father-in-law. This belongs to the young couple. So generally we have a principle of you cannot impose an issur on something which doesn't belong to you. Now, that's not so straightforward, because we know that if a goy touches my wine, he does make it also. It's not his, so it's not so poshut. So there's a difference whether it's a maisa or it's not a maisa. If it's a deed, an action, or not an action. So let's read here. You have in Shulchan Aruch in Merideya Kuf Mem Hey Sif Ches. We're going to read it inside. Baalei Chaim Einon Nesarim. A living animal will not become condemned as being dedicated to Avodah Zarah. Not only by mere saying, if a man prostrates himself, bows down in worship to his own animal, loy nesra, the animal does not become us. Why? Because this is a klal. Baalei Chaim Einon, a living animal does not become us. Now, in relation to korbanos, this would be disqualified for a korban. That's called Muktzah. Laved Zorah. Not like Muktzah in Shabbos, Muktzah Laved Zorah. But as far as Yeridea, whether you're allowed to have a benefit from it, so an animal which has been worshipped is mutar behanu. Then it says, also b'maaseh, if an action was done, sheshochato lavedes rechavim, that the animal was slaughtered is in an act of worship for Avodah Zarah, afilu siman echad, even if it's only one of the two pipes, the windpipe or the food pipe, nesro, and the point here is afilu eino shaloi. And the explanation here is that there's a difference between ma'aser and less than ma'aser. If it's a ma'aser, then even though it's not yours, it wasn't not your business to touch it, but you could bring an issur on something which isn't yours. So you can damage something through a ma'aser. But merely a dibur would not impose an issur on someone else's property. And so, therefore, this Catholic father who blessed his bread would not make not his bread, it's his daughter's and her husband's bread. It would not make it also. The question would be, what would be in his own home if he would make this invocation? Would it make the bread dedicated to Avodah Zarah, etc.? Obviously, that would have to look at more carefully what exactly is being said there in that. Is that an issue? Here he's coming. A ger should be behaving respectfully to their non-Jewish parent. That's actually something which is encouraged in halacha. So yeah. Someone's asking if your tefillin turn out to be possible, are you entitled to a money back? The answer is yes, definitely. And if you buy a chicken which turns out to be treif, in other words, from a kosher butcher, if you open it up and it turns out to be treif, you are entitled to a refund, yes. Even if they were not expected to know, you're still entitled to a refund. In other words, an entitlement to a refund is not because they tricked you. The fact that they've sold you something which is invalid is you're entitled to a refund. Yeah. Where it becomes more complicated, where let's say there's something which is possible, the Ma'aser, the Sefer says don't use it, but there is a shiur which says it is kosher. Let's say mezuzah with a letter which it's machlekes, yeah. So you go back to the soicher and you say you sold me a mezuzah, it's not valid. Well, he says, what about according to this shiur? It is valid. That can be a little bit more complicated. The Choshen Mishpat, whether he's obliged to give you a refund. Okay. Let's move on. Someone asks me about whether women should be saying repeating the words of Shema to make up 248 words. So on the bottom of the screen, you have here from the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, at the end of Hilchos Tefilin, where he says that Kriyas Shema has got Reish Mem Hei Teves, has got 245 words. V'chosru Gimel Teves lahashlim minyan Reish Mem Ches Teves, and there's 3 words short to make up the number of 248. In order to make up from 245 to 248, it's customary for the chazan to repeat the words Hashem Elokeichem Emes. This is well known. But then the Alter Rebbe adds the following: Yochid hamispalel le'atzmai, if you're davening on your own, Yachzer teves ani Hashem Elokeichem. So you say ani Hashem Elokeichem, ani Hashem Elokeichem Emes. That's the Alter Rebbe's chiddush. Maybe other poskim, but most poskim don't take this view. Okay, but there is the idea of making up the number of 248 words. The question is, what's the significance of 248? Well, that's corresponding to the number of organs in the human body. The question is, that's only in a male body. The way it's described in the Mishnah in Ohalos goes into quite a lot of detail, how many organs there are in the hand, etc., etc. An organ means it's bone and flesh and sinew. So in a male body is 248. In the female bodies, two opinions there was 251 or 252. So therefore, the question is being asked: does a woman who doesn't have Ramach Evarim, has a different number, should she be saying these extra 3 words? A woman doesn't have to say Shema, but if she says Shema, should be she saying the extra 3 words? So you can see here on the screen you have from Shiur Mitzion and Halocho, which is on the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, Siman Yud Ches. He quotes from the Minchas Elazar. Mentioned last week, I think we were talking about Minchas Elazar. So the Muktzah, he discusses this question. Someone asked him whether a woman should be saying the extra 3 words. And he says, listen, this whole thing is based upon Kabbalah. It's based upon Zohar. Therefore, I take the liberty of learning Pshat, and therefore coming to a conclusion based upon Kabbalah. And he explains that the inyan of Ramach Evarim is not the focus on the person's Ramach Evarim, but it's talking about Evarim of the Shechina Kivyochel. Doesn't go in too much detail there, but this is you have in Chazal, in Kabbalah, you have this idea of Ramach Evarim Shel Mailo, and perhaps the idea of Ramach Mitzvahs is related to that. Anyway, he says the Ramach Evarim means Evarim Shel Mailo, not on the person himself. And consequently, there's no difference between a man and a woman being connecting through their Shema to the Ramach Evarim Shel Mailo. And there he says a woman saying Shema should also endeavor to say those extra 3 words to make up the Ramach Tevis, the 248 words. Let's move on. So now, someone asks a question: should an Ovel Rahman al-Itzlan, if he is in the middle of davening and he's behind the minyan, and it's time for Kaddish, does he interrupt his davening to say Kaddish? Now, there is a letter of the Rebbe to Rabbi Dubov, alav shalom. By the way, Mazel Tov to his Einikol and or Einikol, who carries his name, Yitzchok Dubov ben Reb Nissen David, who became a chosen, I guess, Erev Shabbos, Rabbi Yitzchok Dubov was the mashgiach in the yeshiva in Manchester, and he wrote to the Rebbe, asked the question. There's a letter of the Frierdiker Rebbe very much encouraging the importance of saying the Kaddish before Hoidu. This letter is printed in Sefer HaMamorim Tov Shin Tes. So it was probably published in a Kuntras around that time. Rabbi Dubov davened longer than the minyan, so it looks like he would start davening Shacharis ahead of the minyan, and therefore, and there was no one else saying the Kaddish. So he was asking, should he interrupt in the middle of Sukkot Zimra to say the Kaddish before Haidu? And there the Rebbe is a little bit apprehensive. He says it's not your personal chiyuv. And the Rebbe does not encourage him to say the Kaddish in the middle of Sukkot Zimra because he shouldn't be mafsik, and it's not his duty, it's not his personal duty. It's a duty that the Kaddish should be said, but it's not his personal duty. So actually, from that letter itself, you see that the Rebbe is saying it's not your personal. If it was your personal duty, then you would be allowed to be mafsik. Now, all these halachas about being mafsik in the middle of Sukkot Zimra and Birchas Krishma are not written in the Gemara. We do. Every kid has learned a little bit of Mishnayos brachas, knows mafsik p'nei hayira, mafsik p'nei hakavod. About interrupting in Shema to greet a person out of respect or out of awe. And then the later poskim say, well, if you are allowed to interrupt in Shema in order to of a human being, how much more so for a kavod of Hashem? That's why we are interrupted in the middle of Birchas Krishma to say Amen Shemirabu, etc. Here's the question about Kaddish. So now, this you can see here, this is from Piskei Teshuvos again. This is from Siman Samach Vav, where he says, a Yosim, an orphan, should not be saying Kaddish in Birchas Krishma, even though there's no one else to say that Kaddish. However, he says, if he is a chiyuv, and he won't have a later minyan, then hamekel bebein haprokim yesh la amil yismeich. So if he does have a chiyuv, and then to say kaddish between bein haprokim, let's say between Yotzei Ha'Ma'oros and Avos Olam, etc., then there is room to be made. As I say, that since he does have a chiyuv, then you could kind of connect it to this idea of like bein a year to be allowed to be mafsik to say kaddish. Not everyone agrees, but there is room to be made. Someone's asking why by Krishma Shalamito we don't say the extra three words. Actually, that's not correct. There is a letter of the Rebbe that in Krishma Shalamito you should say the extra three words. There's a kind of there's a Hayom Yom which is a little bit unclear. There's someone in Hayom Yom it says that Krishma Shalamito you should say the word emes. But there's a letter of the Rebbe which says, although I wrote there to say the word emes, that's not to say you should, but you still should say the extra three words. And this is based upon the Magen Avraham, where it's similar to Shlamater, somewhere around there, the din of Krishma Shalamito. The reason, why do you say the whole Shema again at night? I mean, if you already daven Ma'ariv Bismanoi, so you're very Yotzei Krishma. So why are you saying Krishma again, the whole Krishma? Some people only say Till Visharecha, only the first parsha. And those who say the whole Shema, it's that the saying of the Shema should be a protection for the Ramach Evorim. And therefore, in Krishma Shalamita also you should be saying Ani Hashem Lekechem, Ani Hashem Lekechem Emes. In some of the Chabad Sidurim, I'm sure that is included. Some of the older ones don't have that clarity. Yeah. Now, going back to our earlier discussion, you can ask the question: should a woman be saying the extra three words in Krishma Shalamita? Yeah, according to the word of the Muktzah, you can argue and she doesn't need to because that's got to do with the Ramach Evorim of the person. Okay, let's move on. Right, so now we're now just on Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Just about a month ago, someone came over to me, a shliach, and he is recently moved on shlichus in his area. So he does not have a Shabbos minyan. So he was in our shul on the morning of Rosh Chodesh Tevis, and he says, it's now a month since I came back from Giyores HaShluchim, the first time I'm at Kriyas Torah. Do I say Birchas HaGomel today? I felt quite uncomfortable about it. A month later, he's saying Birchas HaGomel, we say it within 3 days. All right, after that, is it totally open, or is there a time limit? So, Bashkafa Rishona, there's no time limit, but it felt a little bit strange. And then I don't remember the other event. Another person came with the same question during the past month about saying Birchas HaGomel long after the event. Perhaps there is no medical procedure. Now this is from the Aruch HaShulchan. It was already written that one should not delay more than 3 days. But if there is a delay, it's okay. If there's been a long interval, the whole experience has been forgotten, he should no longer say the bracha. The Ovad HaBracha is forfeited that bracha. Then he throws in the Yesh Omim Ad Hey Yomim. I'm not sure where he gets that from. As I'm reading this now, I'm thinking about, you have the idea, as mentioned in Hilchos Tefillah, if a person has traveled particularly by sea, he is potem in a tefillah for 3 days. Nowadays we don't follow that, but why a person for 3 days after the journey is still in upheaval? So possibly that's the cheshbon of the 3 days for Birchas HaGomel, because up to 3 days the person is still kind of connected to the event. After that, it becomes forgotten. At any rate, what you can see here, whether it's 5 days or more, but if it's a whole month, now I realize, I had a journey a month ago. Sofik brachas lahakil. I mean, you see here, Baruch HaShulchan says not to, and the chayr is mistaver. So someone is saying that jet lag lasts till 5 days. I'm sure that's not what the Aruch HaShulchan meant, but okay. Some people take longer to recover. Fine. Okay, let's move on to the next point, and that is when we say Shema in Rabbeinu Tam's. Why do we say the third parasha of Shema? We say Shema v'hoya Shemoya. Those are the parashas which are in the Tefilin. Also v'yida v'hoya Kiriyacha. So we recite the four passages which are in the scrolls in the Tefilin. But why are we saying parashas Tzitzis, which is not there? Now you can see here. Here I've got a quote from a sefer called Chikrei Minhagim from Rabbi Gorari in Chulon. This is volume Hey, the fifth volume. He's but the earliest who addresses this is Maram Shik. Maram Shik was a Talmud of the Chassam Sofer, living in Hungary, and a Talmud of his noticed that he's saying also Vayomer, and he asks him. Now, it's quite a long piece in the Maram Shik. He says the following: Kol hakoire, it says in the Gemara, Kol hakoire krishma v'lo tefillin ki'ilu heidus sheker be'atzmai. One who puts on, one who reads the Shema without tefillin, it's as if he's given false witness. Be'atzmai. Now, before explaining that word be'atzmai, what's that got to do with us over here? If we take the view that the halacha is like Rabbeinu Tam, not like Rashi, so then when he said Shema in davening, before putting on Rabbeinu Tam's, he wasn't wearing tefillin, so he was made a edus sheker be'atzmai. To rectify that, so he says Shema again in the Rabbeinu Tam's, in case he had read the Shema without tefillin. That's the thinking here. Now, what does it mean? So Rashi learns that Be'atzmo is actually referring to Hashem. And the usage of the word Be'atzmo is like sometimes you have what we use deliberately, you don't want to speak in a disparaging way towards Hashem. Therefore you say on himself, but really it means Hashem. It was like a lack of Kabbalah Malchus Shemayim or something like that. He's saying Shema without the tefillin, he's lacking in his submission to Hashem. Rabbeinu Yoina, who has the commentary on the Rif in the back of Gemara Brachas, he says Kila Atzmo is on himself. He's said something wrong about himself. Okay. According to so the Maram Shik is saying that according to Rashi, means that your Shema, which you said without tefillin, is as if you're lacking in proper Kabbalas El Malchus Shemayim. Okay, number one. Point number two is that tzitzis is also got to do with El Malchus Shemayim. And this, he refers to the Gemara in Brachas. Do I have the number on the page over here? I'm sorry, I don't have the Ahmed. But it says in the Gemara, why do we say, we say the third parsha of Shema in order to have the inyan of Yetzias Mitzrayim. But there are many parshas in the Torah which talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim. So why was Dafka this parsha selected to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim? So he says. It says there about has five things, five inyonim, five topics which are brought up in the parsha of Vayomer, and it says Bishlam Hanit Las Mifreshon. First three are explicit, and one of them is oil mitzvahs, an acceptance of all mitzvahs. Tichsiv was v'isem oisoi was zachartem as kol mitzvahs Hashem. You'll see the tzitzis and you remember all the mitzvahs of Hashem. So without going to the rest of the five, but one of the reasons why Vayomer was the selected parsha to invoke the concept of the remembrance of Yetzias Mitzrayim, because it has in it the Kabbalas Oil Mitzvahs. So according to Rashi, who says that the problem of a person reading Shema without Tefilin is because of a shortcoming in Kabbalas Yomachas Shemayim Kabbalas Oil Mitzvahs. So right, so therefore to repair that, one should say the Parashat Tzitzis also in Rabbeinu Tam's. Okay, so that was, actually, if you want to look it up, it's in the Chirkei Minhagim, it's also about 5 pages or more. This is Bekitzer, what he explains. Okay, so now you have something, a question about whipped cream. It's going to take a little longer than just 2 minutes. Here's the question like this. There's a concept called tibule b'mashke, that if you have a food dipped in a liquid, then you need to wash netilas yadayim before eating it. And that's why we wash netilas yadayim, urchat, before dipping the karpas in the salt water on Pesach night, because tibule b'mashke requires netilas yadayim. We don't say a brocha, but we do make a point of washing. The Mishnah Berurah is more mekel, the Alter Rebbe is more machmir about this, and Chassidim are generally machmir about this. So let's say if you are having a coffee and you want to dip your biscuits into the coffee, so Chassidish Yid will only do so if he's washing netilas yadayim, sitting by a farbrengen, picking up a pickle with your fingers. Again, it's tibule b'mashke, so that's why they give toothpicks, yeah. So you shouldn't have to pick them up with your fingers. It's a question halocha. So now someone asked me the question. They have for breakfast, this is somewhere in America, they have for breakfast, they have waffles, and the waffles are also nimshach with whipped cream. And you can see on the picture, it comes in a pressurized tube, and you release the nozzle and guess it comes out. And it's important to read the details. It's got first ingredients is grade A cream, sucrose, corn syrup, non-fat dry milk, solids, monoglycerides, natural and artificial flavor, salt, propellant, nitrous oxide gas. So now this stuff which comes out of this tube becomes like a frothy substance. Is that called liquid? And therefore, having the waffles dipped in, well, they are covered with this stuff. Is that called tibule b'mashke? So let's say that's clear that if milk is made into butter, that's now a solid. And if you put butter on a cracker, you do not have to wash netilas yadayim als tibule b'mashke, because it's a solid. So when milk became a solid, it does not have a tibule b'mashke. What is interesting is, what about yogurt? Dipping, let's say, crackers, breadsticks, something, which are mazonos, you dip them into yogurt. Is that tibule b'mashke? And that's actually quite clear in the Bayer Hetev that yogurt is considered a liquid and subject to, and therefore you'd need to do netilas yadayim, tibule b'mashke. Right. So it's very interesting that we have, well, this is in Sim Kuf Nun Ches. So let's just look first of all you've got 7 liquids, which are the mashke. One of them is milk. Talks about then whey, mecholov, is also considered like milk. That means after you make cheese, there remains some kind of solids which float to the top, and that's called mei cholov. And then he says cholov chomutz, sour milk, shekoyin yogurt, tzorich netilas yadayim. And he refers to a sefer called Mate Yosef, and he refers to Yad Aaron. I looked up the Matayos, I did not look up the Yad Aaron. Okay, but you see that yogurt is considered a liquid. If you dip something into yogurt, it would be called tibule b'mashke. Incidentally, we're learning now Gemara Psochim, and we're now just towards the end of the Masechta. But when it came up about charoises, etc., and it says there, this kol shetibule b'mashke, yerek b'kutach. If you dip a vegetable in kutach or in vinegar, needs netilas yadayim. Now, kutach comes up much earlier also in the Arba Mini Medina in the fourth Perek, if I'm not mistaken, and it talks there, kutach habavli, and there you get the impression that kutach is a mixture of bread and of liquid. So it's interesting that the Rashbam here says that kutach is called a mashke. That doesn't seem to be the impression from the piece which we're going to read from the Alter Rebbe. Okay, so now let's read the Alter Rebbe carefully here in Siman Kuf Nun Ches Siv Ches. He's talking there about honey, and honey we mean here bees honey. That is one of the Shiva Mashkin. If you have some kind of pudding or something where you've got a presence of honey as a separate, a visible presence there, inside or gaba on top, but if there's no honey on its own, it's just mixed with other food. So you've got here a food, let's say a bread, which has been broken down. It's now become totally blended, become inseparable with the honey. That was a long sentence. That looking at this mixture, there's no presence of honey, which is moist, without a mixture of the other substance. Let's say the bread, which is mixed into it, a cake or something. So then, if that's the case, any honey has got with it mixed in the other stuff. So then, that honey is no longer called honey; it's called a new substance. Becomes a food. Even though it still has it's wet to the point that if you touch it and then you touch another thing, that would also become wet. It's transferable moisture. Sometimes there's something that's moist, you touch it, and you touch something else, you haven't transferred the moisture. But here it is, but because it's so well blended with the other ingredients, so then it's no longer considered honey. The hainu. Now then he adds another point, and it becomes now this is where I'm a little bit hesitant. Let's come back to those ingredients. You've got here grade A cream, which on its own would be a mashke. Then you throw in sucrose, corn syrup, dry milk solids. I don't know what glycerides look like. And I would even say even the propellant is, after all that, and after it comes out with the propellant, is that called a liquid? And so here the Alter Rebbe seems to be saying it's not being liquid is dependent on the mixture of other ingredients. But then there's another very important feature. Then he says, it becomes that this mixture becomes thick, somewhat. It's not the kind of thing which you would gulp down and swallow. when you drink, you do not need your tongue to help you manipulate the food to help you swallow. And that is called shasiya. That's called drinking. And probably a smoothie would also be considered a drink. But here, because it's become thicker, it's something which is, the style is that you'd somehow manipulate with your tongue, ad shetagia lebeis habliya, to enable the food to get to your where you swallow. Shezoihi derech achila. So drinking means that you can pour it down. You don't need your tongue to help you drink. You do need your tongue to help you eat. And that's the difference. So that's why I'm saying, even if you're going to tell me that those ingredients are minimal, the sucrose, etc., they're just flavors. Even if you tell me that, but once it's got that propellant in, it becomes quite a thick mixture, if I remember correctly. And as a result, that's not called a mashke anymore. It's called an oichel. It's called a ma'achol. And once it's called a ma'achol, the one's called a food, there's no problem of it being tipul of a mashke. He goes a bit further. He talks about plums and cherries, which are mixed with honey, and they become thick pieces. I'm not sure exactly of that application, but this is the Alter Rebbe's psak. Now, what I found quite remarkable, about 30 years ago, I put this question to Reb Shalom Friedman, Gesund. I asked him, what is the defining factor, whether it's called a liquid or a solid, and he said this idea of hipuch beloshen, of swishing. You need to swish with your tongue. And having searched today, it looks like the earliest source, because I'm looking around in the Yotah Chochmah, I see several contemporary sources, and they say this definition, but they all trace it to the Alter Rebbe, which I find very remarkable, that the Alter Rebbe has introduced how do you say, what is a benchmark to differentiate what's the difference between a food and a drink, comes up with this new idea, hipuch beloshen, which I did look up in the Mata Yosef, which is the Alter Rebbe in the notes here refers to this Mata Yosef. The Mata Yosef was a contemporary of the Pri Chodosh, so 100 years before the Alter Rebbe or something, but he doesn't use that language. The Alter Rebbe also refers to Mogen Avraham in Siman Reish Ches, who is also struggling with the book. How do you define what's a liquid and what's a solid? But this term of hipuch beloshen is the Alter Rebbe's own creation, as far as I can see. But this is the definition. A food is something which you need to have your tongue to help you to swallow, and if you can pour it straight down your throat, that would be called a liquid. So that's in Santazach. When I was in Lud in last year, I was there at Tammuz, so I spoke to Rabbi Rov Alashvili, who's one of the he's got great expertise in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. We see in the introduction of the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, it's mentioned that the Alter Rebbe started writing a revised edition of Hilchos Netilas Yadayim, etc. And he acknowledged that what we have over here is evident. There are some very spectacular chidushim in Hilchos Netilas Yadayim, and this is probably one of those, where the Alter Rebbe comes up with this definition. So I feel this is yes, a clear answer that the cream being so thick is no longer called a liquid, and therefore there's no din of tibul b'mashke. One last question, which may or may not be on your list, may have been added later. So one of our listeners followed on from, we had a previous discussion about covering the shelyad during putting on the tefillin out of tznius. And I saw just now that's also written in the Shar HaKavonos, you cover there because of tznius. But then why do many of us take off the plastic or carton cover before making the bracha? And to the point that you take it off, and then after you put on your shelyad, before you put on your rosh, the minig of the Rebbe would put the cover back. And why do you need to take the cover off? I'm going to confess that for many years, my tefillin shalyad cover was so tight, it was very awkward to remove it. So for years I did not remove it, but some stage I got a different cover which is able to remove. And yeah, so what's the reason for this? I was taught to take it off, and then I was so stuck I wasn't taking it off. I'm questioning whether it's necessary, but now I can see here. Now the background to this is that it says in the Gemara that if the tefillin are covered with another material, if you'd coat the tefillin with the zohov, with gold, or with another material, that could be a disqualifying factor if you cover the tefillin with something else. So if the cover were to remain indefinitely stuck, kind of not stuck, but if it's covering the whole time, that kind of is relating to see if that covering the bias with an invalid material, and consequently, this is the reason for the minhag that the tefillin, when you make the bracha, they are it's just the tefillin. Afterwards, you put on the cover to protect. And looking up here in the Piskei Teshuvos and Simcha of Zion, there are many Gedolei Hadoros who objected to wearing the cover altogether. As we know, the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't wear the cover. Our Rebbe did, but that seems to be the reason for removing it, that the carton does not become part and parcel of the tefillin. We have now a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to share with you that in volume 3 of Sefer Nesiva Misteh Shlichus, I wrote there a chapter about Amira Lenachri. And someone recently saw an article quoting, which I'd written apparently, if someone had parked on the red route, it might say Shahoya, across this on Stamford Hill, there's a red route, which means that in the evening it's okay to park there, but if it's past 8 o'clock in the morning, it's a very busy road, and if a car is parked there, the likelihood is there's soon going to be a tow truck and it's going to pick up your car, and it's going to cost you a fortune to redeem it from the car pound, etc. And now, so there's a story that someone came from overseas and borrowed his father's car, and he parked it on the red route, and comes Shabbos, and then the car is over there, and then we realize that if it's left there, it's going to be a fortune to redeem it. So are you allowed to ask a goy? So I had written that you are allowed to ask a goy to remove it, and my basis was on a halacha that if you are in the street and you realize you've got your wallet with you, so there's a rule of ein odom mamid atzmoi al mamoinoi. Chacham understood that you can't expect a person to walk away and leave his wallet over there, and so that he shouldn't do it himself, he's allowed to call a goy to take it to safety. So I was using the same principle that he should be allowed to ask a goy to take the car to safety. Now the problem is that it says if you ben hashmoshes, if you have a hefsed merubah, you're allowed to ask a goy to save you from hefsed merubah and do something to help you to save from a significant loss. So if you're only allowed to ask a goy ben hashmoshes, so now you have a heter even middle of Shabbos to ask a goy. So I was struggling with how to reconcile this. Yeah, since you have a heter only ben hashmoshes, here you have a heter even on Shabbos. Is hefsed merubah allowing you to ask a goy to do isam min haTorah? That's my question. Now, very interesting. There is in Mishnah Brura, he has a very long entry, somewhere Shin Lamed Bey, Shin Lamed Dal, somewhere around there, from his son. He had a son who passed away he was at 23 years old, and Mr. Brura brings a whole long thing about understanding in the case of a fire and in the case of the wallet. What's the difference? Why in the case of the fire there's lots of restrictions, and it can only salvage so much, and in the case of the wallet you are allowed to ask a goy to save it. In one of the explanations is, in the case of the fire, you're not doing anything. It's happening by itself, and so you're told just stand by. In the case of the wallet, you're expecting the person to drop the wallet and walk away. That's too much to ask. Therefore, they say there you're allowed to ask a kol goy. So if that's the distinction, so then in the case of the car being parked, it's more comparable to the case of the fire than to the case of the wallet. there's another explanation. In the case of the fire, if you would be allowed to call a goy, and the goy will put out so much fire, and then he's not doing enough, so then you'll be tempted to help him to do more. So the more, that's why they put the brakes there. In the case of the wallets, you ask the goy to take the wallets, there's not going to be any more malacha. So it's not so clear, and I've been looking around. Is there any clear explanation and the parameters? This heter of the wallet that you are allowed to ask a goy, would that heter apply also to be allowed to take the car to a safe place that it shouldn't get towed away? I might, if I'm wrong, my psak was wrong. Okay, so I'll have to admit the truth. Okay, that's what I have for tonight. I wish you a good tavoch. About next Muktzah Shabbos. So we're going to have a Farbrengen. We have a guest of Aaron Ginsberg from Borough Park, a very geschmacke mashpia. So he's going to be our guest for Shabbos and for Muktzah Shabbos. And the Farbrengen is called for 8 o'clock. So as a policy, I don't like to have two shul activities at the same time. And consequently, want to give you advance notice that next week the shiur online will be between 7 and 8 p.m. rather than the regular time. A good tavoch, and we should hear Besudas Tevis from here and from Eretz HaKodesh, the Shivuyim and the soldiers should all return home safely, and Shalom al Yisrael, and should have Simchas Olam al Rosham, Mashiach Tzidkenu now mamish. A good tavoch.
Good